Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. Imagine leaving behind everything, your family, your teachers, even the greatest spiritual master, not to follow another path, but to find your own. This is the story of Siddhartha, a man who searches for wisdom not in books, not in rituals, but in life itself. From the discipline of the Brahmins to the hardships of the ascetics, from the temptations of wealth and love to the simple wisdom of a ferryman, Siddhartha experiences it all. But true enlightenment does not come from seeking. It comes from listening. What can we learn from his journey? Let's explore the timeless wisdom of Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha. Part 1. Chapter 1. The Son of the Brahmin. In the serene town by the river, where the Brahmins held the highest place in society, lived Siddhartha, the beloved son of a revered Brahmin. From an early age, he was recognized as extraordinary, handsome, intelligent, and gifted in the sacred rituals and knowledge passed down through generations. His days were filled with study, meditation, and discourse with the wisest men. His father saw in him the makings of a great sage, and his mother adored his every movement. His best friend, Govinda, was devoted to him. He admired Siddhartha's sharp mind, his deep reflections, and the quiet fire that burned within him. Govinda was certain that Siddhartha was destined for greatness, not as an ordinary Brahmin or a priest, but as someone who would rise above them all, perhaps even become a god. Yet, for all the admiration and love surrounding him, Siddhartha felt no peace. Despite the teachings, the prayers, and the sacred verses, he was restless. He sought something beyond the rituals, something beyond the words of the Vedas. He pondered. Where was the self, the innermost part, the ultimate essence? It was not in the flesh, nor in thought, nor in consciousness. So where was it? Though his teachers spoke of the Atman, the eternal self, none of them had truly found it. His father, wise and disciplined, still sought purification daily. The learned Brahmins, despite their knowledge, had not attained complete peace. This troubled Siddhartha. The answers they gave were not enough. He desired direct experience, true wisdom, not just words. One evening, he and Govinda sat under a banyan tree, meditating. As they practiced, Siddhartha murmured a verse. Om is the bow, the arrow is the soul, the Brahman is the target that one must hit. But no matter how deeply he meditated, the longing within him remained unfulfilled. Then, one day he saw a group of Samanas, wandering ascetics, who renounced all possessions and lived in the forest. Something in them called to him. Perhaps by leaving everything behind, by fasting and suffering, he could finally break free of illusion and find the truth. That night, he made his decision. At dawn, he went to his father and stood silently behind him. The Brahmin, sensing his presence, asked, "What is it you wish to say, my son?" Siddhartha bowed and spoke calmly. "Father, I desire to leave your house and join the Samanas. I wish to renounce everything and seek the path of enlightenment." His father was silent for a long time. The night passed, and Siddhartha remained standing, motionless. Hour after hour, his father returned to check on him. The boy did not move. At last, as dawn broke, the father understood. Siddhartha's spirit had already left him. "Go then," he said at last, "but return if you find nothing better." Siddhartha bowed, then went to his mother, kissed her, and stepped into the silent streets of the town. Near the last hut, a shadow rose and joined him. "You have come," Siddhartha said with a smile. "I have come," replied Govinda. Together they left to find the Samanas. Chapter 2. With the Samanas. Siddhartha and Govinda entered the forest, leaving behind the comforts of home, food, and shelter. They sought out the Samanas, the ascetics who had renounced everything in pursuit of spiritual enlightenment. When they found them, thin, sunburned men with hollow eyes and ragged robes, they humbly asked to join their ranks. Siddhartha gave away his fine garments to a beggar and kept only a simple loincloth and an earth-colored cloak. He ate only once a day, then once every 2 days, then once every 2 weeks. His body withered, his ribs protruded, and his senses dulled. He learned to fast, to endure pain, to hold his breath until his heart slowed to a whisper. His goal was to conquer the self, to strip away desires, thoughts, and identity. He stood in the scorching sun, letting it burn his skin until he felt nothing. He sat motionless in the freezing rain, enduring the chill until his body no longer trembled. He cast himself into thorn bushes, allowing his flesh to bleed, seeking to detach from all sensation. A goal stood before Siddhartha: to become empty. Empty of thirst, empty of longing, empty of dreams, empty of joy and sorrow. He meditated so deeply that he could dissolve his being into anything. He became a heron soaring over the river, feeling its hunger and its sharp eyes seeking fish. He became a dead jackal, rotting on the banks, his flesh eaten by vultures. He became dust, scattered by the wind. Yet every time he returned to himself, the cycle was endless. No matter how much he fasted, no matter how much he meditated, he always came back to being Siddhartha. One day, as they walked through a village to beg for food, Siddhartha turned to Govinda and said, "Do you think we have made progress? Have we reached any goals?" Govinda, ever faithful, answered, "We have learned much, Siddhartha. You are admired even by the eldest Samanas. You will soon become a great ascetic." Siddhartha shook his head. "I could have learned the same things from a drunkard in the streets. A man drinks to escape himself. A samana fasts and meditates to escape himself. Both return to the same world afterward. Govinda, do you not see? This is not the way." Govinda was troubled. "But the samanas seek to escape illusion, while a drunkard only seeks a numb moment." "And yet, both wake up the next morning unchanged," Siddhartha replied. For 3 years, they lived this way. Then, rumors of a new teacher reached them. A man called Gautama, the Buddha, had achieved enlightenment and was gathering disciples. He was said to have broken free from suffering, to have escaped the endless cycle of rebirth. Curious, Govinda spoke eagerly of him. "If the Buddha has found the way, should we not seek him out?" Siddhartha smiled. "I thought you were committed to the Samanas for life, Govinda. But yes, we shall go." The next morning, they informed the eldest Samana of their decision to leave. The old man grew angry and cursed them. But Siddhartha only looked into his eyes with calm concentration. A quiet force passed between them, and the old man fell silent, unable to speak or resist. He bowed to Siddhartha, then stepped aside. As they walked away, Govinda whispered, "Siddhartha, you have learned great things. You even have the power to bend the will of others." Siddhartha sighed. "I do not seek power, Govinda. Let the old Samanas be content with their tricks. I seek something greater." With that, the two friends set off toward the town of Sav. Chapter 3. Gautama, Siddhartha, and Govinda arrived in Savatthi, a bustling town where people spoke in awe of the Buddha, Gautama, the enlightened one. His presence was a beacon for seekers, and his disciples walked the streets in simple yellow robes, collecting alms in silence. At the gates of the city, they met a kind woman who directed them to Jetavana, the grove where the Buddha and his followers lived. That night, they rested among the many pilgrims who had come to hear his teachings. At dawn, Siddhartha saw him, a man in a simple robe, walking silently, an alms bowl in hand. His steps were light, his face serene, his very being radiated peace. Siddhartha turned to Govinda and whispered, "Look, this is the Buddha." Govinda, filled with devotion, could not look away. That day they sat among hundreds, listening as Gautama spoke of suffering, the cause of suffering, and the path to liberation. His Words were perfect, clear, and filled with wisdom. Many who heard them renounced their old lives and joined him. Govinda was moved. That evening he told Siddhartha, "I have decided. I will stay and become a disciple of the Buddha." Siddhartha smiled. "You have made a good choice, my friend." Govinda hesitated. "And you? Will you not join as well?" Siddhartha shook his head. "I have heard the teachings, and they are wise, but I must follow my own path." The next morning, Govinda formally asked to become a disciple. The Buddha welcomed him, and as Govinda bowed, Siddhartha saw gratitude in his eyes. Later, Siddhartha approached the Buddha alone. "Your teachings are perfect, exalted one. You have found the truth, but let me ask you something. If everything follows the law of cause and effect, then how can one break free? If all our thoughts and actions are determined by past causes, then how can your disciples truly choose to follow you?" The Buddha looked at him kindly. "You are clever, young man. Your words are well spoken, but beware of too much wisdom." Siddhartha bowed deeply. "I do not doubt you, Gautama. You have reached what I seek. But I must find it in my own way, not through teachings, not through discipleship." The Buddha nodded. "You are wise in your own way, but take care not to walk in circles." Siddhartha left the grove with a new understanding. He had spent years seeking knowledge from teachers, and yet he had not found peace. Now he would seek not from others, but from within himself. As he walked away, he felt strangely alone. For the first time, Govinda was not by his side. Chapter 4. Awakening. As Siddhartha left the grove of Jetavana, he felt a great silence settle within him. He had walked away from his father's teachings, away from the Samanas, and now away from the Buddha himself. For the first time in his life, he stood alone. He had left everything behind: the priests, the rituals, the ascetics, and even the exalted one. He was no longer a Brahmin, no longer a Samana, no longer a disciple. He had become Siddhartha, and nothing else. As he walked through the forest, he saw the world as if for the first time. The trees were no longer obstacles to be ignored in meditation. They were alive. The river shimmered with beauty. The earth beneath his feet felt solid and real. Everything was now present before his eyes, and it was no longer the spell of Mara, no longer the veil of illusion. It was simply the world, beautiful and real. He realized something profound. "I have been seeking knowledge all my life, but I have never learned how to live." Smiling to himself, Siddhartha continued walking, eager to embrace the world anew. Part 2. Chapter 5. Kamala Siddhartha's journey led him to a great river, where he paused, listening to its flow. He crossed over and entered a city where he saw a woman dressed in fine robes, a courtesan of great beauty. She smiled at him. "You wish to learn the art of love?" she asked playfully. "I wish to learn all that life has to teach me," he replied. Her name was Kamala, and she told him that if he wished to be with her, he must have wealth, fine clothes, and gifts. "Love cannot be learned in rags." Siddhartha laughed. He had never worked before, but he knew he could learn. Through his intelligence and charm, he secured work with Kamaswami, a wealthy merchant. He quickly mastered trade, understanding that business was just another game, much like meditation. But it was Kamala who became his true teacher. "You are the best lover I have ever had," she told him one day. "And yet," she added thoughtfully, "you do not truly love." Siddhartha smiled. "Perhaps not, but I learn." Chapter 6. With the childlike people, years passed. Siddhartha became rich, dressing in fine silks, eating lavish meals, and gambling. At first he remained detached from it all, as if merely playing a role. But slowly, without noticing, he changed. He felt anger when he lost money. He became impatient in business. He began to drink, to care about wealth. He had become one of the childlike people, those who lived in a cycle of pleasure and pain, always desiring, never satisfied. One day, he looked in the mirror and saw a man with tired eyes and gray hairs. I have become like them, he thought, and I do not even know how it happened. Filled with disgust, he left the city one night without a word to Kamala or anyone else. He abandoned his riches, his house, his fine clothes, everything. Chapter 7. Sansara Siddhartha wandered in despair. He had tried the path of the ascetics and the path of desire, yet neither had brought him peace. He came once more to the river, exhausted and empty. I have nothing left. There is nothing more for me. A great darkness filled him. He leaned over the river, staring into its depths, contemplating letting himself fall in. But just then a sound rose within him, soft, ancient, powerful. Om, the sacred word, the eternal syllable. A great calm overtook him. He lay down by the river and fell into a deep sleep. When he awoke, the world seemed fresh again. He was alive. He was still Siddhartha. Chapter 8. By the river, Siddhartha remained by the river, watching its endless flow. He met the ferryman, Vasudeva, a simple man with a gentle smile. "Stay with me," Vasudeva said. "The river has much to teach." Siddhartha listened to the river. He saw that it was always changing, yet always the same. He began to understand its wisdom. Slowly, peace returned to him. Chapter 9. The ferryman years passed. Siddhartha lived a simple life, helping Vasudeva ferry people across the river. He no longer sought enlightenment. He simply listened. One day, Kamala arrived at the river, weak and dying from a snake bite. Beside her stood a young boy, her son. Siddhartha knelt beside her, holding her as she took her last breaths. "I knew you would find peace," she whispered. She died in his arms. Now, Siddhartha had a son to care for. Chapter 10. The Son. Siddhartha loved his son deeply, but the boy resented him. He had been raised in wealth and luxury, and he hated the simple life of the ferryman. One night, the boy ran away, back to the city. Siddhartha was heartbroken. Vasudeva reminded him, "You cannot hold on to him. The river will bring him where he must go." Siddhartha wept, but let go. Chapter 11. Years passed. Siddhartha listened more deeply to the river. He saw all life within it, joy and sorrow, gain and loss, birth and death, all flowing together. He saw that everything was connected, everything was one. Vasudeva, seeing that Siddhartha had reached enlightenment, smiled. "You no longer need a teacher," he said. And so, the old ferryman left, walking into the forest, disappearing like a wave fading into the sea. Siddhartha remained, alone, but at peace. Chapter 12. Govinda. One day an old monk arrived at the river. It was Govinda. He did not recognize Siddhartha at first, but when he did, he was astonished. "Teach me, my friend," Govinda begged. "Show me the way." Siddhartha smiled. "I have no teachings to give. Just listen to the river." Govinda, confused, asked, "Then what is the secret?" Siddhartha touched his forehead. And in that moment, Govinda saw everything. The unity of life, the eternal cycle, the river, the faces of all people, all joys, all sorrows, everything. He fell to his knees, weeping. Siddhartha simply smiled. He had found what he had been searching for all his life. Key life lessons from Siddhartha. Hermann. Hesse's Siddhartha offers profound insights into life, self-discovery, and spiritual growth. Here are the key life lessons from the book. 1. True wisdom comes from experience, not just teachings. Throughout his journey, Siddhartha learns that wisdom cannot be taught. It must be lived. He studies with Brahmins, Samanas, and even the Buddha, but none of their teachings bring him the enlightenment he seeks. Key quote. Wisdom cannot be passed on. Wisdom which a wise man tries to pass on to someone always sounds like foolishness. Lesson: books, teachers, and philosophies can guide you, but true understanding only comes from personal experience. 2. The middle path is the best path. Siddhartha explores two extremes, strict asceticism and indulgent luxury, but neither brings him peace. He only finds contentment when he chooses a balanced life as a ferryman. Key quote: I had to experience despair, I had to sink to the greatest mental depths, to thoughts of suicide, in order to experience grace. Lesson: avoid extremes. True fulfillment comes from balance, between detachment and engagement, self-discipline and enjoyment. 3. Let go of attachments and desires. Siddhartha's greatest struggles come from attachment, whether to spiritual teachings, wealth, love, or his own son. He only finds peace when he learns to let go. Key quote: he saw all these forms and faces in 1,000 relationships to each other. None of them died, they only changed, were always reborn, always had a new face. Lesson: happiness comes when we stop clinging to things, possessions, people, or even ideas. Everything is transient. 4. The river is a metaphor for life. The river teaches Siddhartha the greatest lessons. Life flows in a continuous cycle. Everything is connected, and time is an illusion. Key quote: the river is everywhere at once, at its source and at its mouth, in the waterfall, in the ocean, in the mountains, everywhere at once. Lesson: like a river, life is always changing, yet always the same. Accept the flow rather than resisting it. 5. Love without possession. Siddhartha loves Kamala and later his son, but both relationships cause suffering because of attachment. He learns that true love does not mean possession or control. Key quote: you cannot love, O Govinda, because you seek to possess. Love is not about possessing, but about letting things be. Lesson: love deeply, but do not try to control or hold on to people. Love is about giving, not owning. 6. Everyone has their own path. Govinda follows the Buddha, while Siddhartha walks his own path. There is no single correct way to enlightenment. Each person must find their own truth. Key quote: I am on my way, not to seek another doctrine, but to leave all doctrines and teachers and to reach my goal alone, or die. Lesson: your journey is unique. Do not blindly follow others. Trust your own experiences. 7. The present moment is the only reality. Siddhartha realizes that the past and future are illusions. True peace is found by living fully in the present. Key quote: the present only exists for them. The past is not real. The future is not real. Lesson: stop worrying about the past or future. True happiness is found in the now. 8. Inner peace comes from acceptance. By the end of his journey, Siddhartha does not seek to escape suffering or change the world. He simply accepts things as they are. Key quote: what a beautiful river it is. I love it more than anything. I have learned from it. It has taught me to listen. Lesson: happiness comes not from resisting life, but from accepting it with peace and understanding. 9. Words and knowledge are limited. Siddhartha realizes that words can describe truth, but they cannot replace experience. He does not teach Govinda with words. He simply lets him see. Key quote: words do no good. They never express what is truly meant. Lesson: wisdom is beyond words. Live your truth rather than trying to explain it. 10. Everything is connected. At the end, Siddhartha sees that life, suffering, joy, birth, and death are all one. Nothing is separate. Key quote: everything is one, Govinda. When you see the world as a whole, everything fits. Lesson: We are all part of the same reality. There is no separation between you and the universe. Final thought. Siddhartha teaches us that life is not about finding a single truth or destination. It is about experiencing, learning, and growing. Like the river, we must flow.